So here are some things that you should consider. When you're transitioning to Agile, the buy-in. The buy-in is going to be key. What do I mean by buy-in? I mean getting everybody on board, getting everybody's consensus, make sure that they all agree to what you're doing. That's great. That's going to be helpful. So the first thing you want to talk about is the sprint. So this is how you set it up, right? So first, you have to choose a sprint duration that makes sense for your organization. For most people, 2 weeks is enough. 2 weeks is enough, but I've seen 3 week sprints. I've even seen 4 week sprints. Now, 4 week sprints have not really been successful in my opinion because it's not really a sprint at that point. It's like it's a whole month of a development. That's a lot. But 2 week sprints is just enough time. I also found that starting on a Wednesday seems to work very well. The reason is because if you start on the Wednesday, you end the sprint on the Tuesday, the next sprint starts the next Wednesday. It's in the middle of the week. If you have holidays on Monday, Friday, sometimes people take off because of the weekend. Tuesday sometimes it's just an odd day anyway, but Wednesday, and it's smack in the middle of the week, it just feels that everybody's there more often than not, and so you have less disruptions in your capacity. I just found that Wednesdays to Wednesday really work well in my experience, so you can consider having that for your sprint as well. The next thing you want to think about if you want to make your sprint planning more effective and you're just setting up your sprints, you're transitioning into Agile, is the team. Your team is very crucial to having a good transition into Scrum and definitely in how to make your sprint planning more effective. You want to make sure that you have the right people in the right roles. And again, because the Scrum team is a little bit different from the traditional organization of your company, people could occupy a specific title in the company, but on the Scrum team, they play a different role. So for example, you could have your VP of product who is VP of product in the company, but on the Scrum team, they operate as the product owner, for example. Or you could have the lead architect, but on the Scrum team, they're just developer, or they operate as a developer. So it doesn't tie one-to-one with their official title. On the Scrum team, we're all just working towards this one sprint goal or product goal, and we just play either Scrum Master, product owner, or developer role. So having the right people is there. Now, if you're working on a software project, again, Agile could be used in different organizations to do different things. It could be on a marketing team that uses Agile to help them get their marketing tasks completed and things like that. But if you're working in software development, you want to make sure you have the right people on the team. So make sure that if you have front end or back end or full stack developers, that you have those people represented properly on the team. If you have offshore or onshore, that you make sure you have your sprint planning at the times when everybody can participate. You want to get the team together as much as possible. You don't really want to have two different sprint planning for the same team, but you might have to find some concessions there. If you have people in different time zones, it might be a challenge. Do you have a dedicated QA, right? I mean, normally on the Scrum team, they'll just be lumped into the developer role, but you definitely need people to QA that's dedicated to QA and not just when there's something to test, they go over here and test, but that's not their main job. You'll have less quality output if you have a resource, like doubling as your QA resource is not really the best thing for you having a good transition and also making the most effective process, right? It wouldn't be effective if you have someone who's, playing dual roles. What about having a dedicated product owner? That's also important. So someone who's not a tech lead, because I've seen, because the technology is the focus, it's the output, it's what we produce, that some teams have used their tech lead as their product owner, but there's a danger in that because you tend to have very technically viable output sometimes at the expense of being user friendly or meeting the business need, right? So you typically don't want your product owner to be just a technical person because you might not get the business outcomes that you're looking to get. Do you have a dedicated Scrum Master? Or is somebody just playing the role of Scrum Master, but that's not their main function? So the more you have resources spread thinner, the less dedicated they can be and better output that you have. Although I have seen combinations that really work very well, like Scrum Master slash Business Analyst. That works very well. But Product Owner slash Scrum Master is not good because you're clearing the roadblocks and at the same time you're coming up with the features and the priorities. It's just not a good mix. So be careful how you try to stretch your team to play dual roles. Some of them make sense, some of them don't. And then who writes the user story? The classic question, right? It's what everybody always gets confused about. And so I've found the people who are the most confused about this are the people who don't have a business analyst on the team. They have what they see in the Scrum guide, they have a Scrum Master, they have a product owner, they have developers, and then they're like, who's going to write the actual story? And so the product owner jumps in and writes the story, but then they don't have the business analysis training. So the stories sometimes can get convoluted. They can have different formats that don't really meet the best practices. And so when you go to sprint planning, it's a mess, right? I mean, you can get by. You're going to eventually figure it out. You're going to have something to develop and something to show at the end of the sprint. You can do that for sure. But are you being the most efficient? Probably not. So, how to make your sprint planning more efficient? Well, you know who's writing the story is one way. And typically, it's a business analyst who writes the story, okay, because we have the skills for it. Now, if you don't have a business analyst, the next person is a product owner. But really and truly, the business analysis career has, originally been very waterfall focused, but now because of the sweep of Agile all over the place, it's become quite adept at working in an Agile environment. And so we have the skills. We have the best people to write the stories, right? So if your team doesn't have a BA, you need to encourage your management to go get one. Now, the team is very important at the beginning. I mean, obviously throughout, but like forming the team and getting to that place where you are self organized, you know what works, you have an idea of your velocity and the capacity and how much you can get done in a 2 week period of time. All that stuff takes time. Typically takes around 3 sprints to start getting a good feel. It starts off in chaos. You go into a very tumultuous time and then you start to normalize and start becoming high performing. Here's a graph of typically what happens to new teams when they're starting out. So you form the team up here, and then there's storming, which means everything is going wrong. You can't figure out the process that works for everybody. There's a lot of confusion. People don't agree on things. It's a chaotic time that every team goes through. And then you start to kind of get the gist of it. You got improving the process. People chime in. You start to normalize how you do things. You come up with your own best practices. You figure out what works and what doesn't work. And once you get to this norming phase, then everything is kind of more, stable, and then you can start being high performing, right? So you really have to go through this kind of dip right here and then come out of that on the other side, getting to the higher performances. So if you're in the storm and you're like, nothing works, it's so chaotic, I don't understand, oh my God, this is Agile? This chaos is Agile? How do people work in this? That's because you're probably in the storming phase. And you don't want to be in the storming phase for too long. A couple, maybe 2 or 3 sprints, you might still be figuring it out, but you should be coming out of that in your 4th or 5th sprint. You know what I mean? So you need to quickly get out of that stage because this is where people get fed up. They quit. They abandon Agile. They say it doesn't work because they haven't been able to get out of it into the normal phase. But it's normal. This happens to every team. So if your team is experiencing this, just know this is where you're going to end up if you can get through this hump at the bottom here. So the other thing that's key is the leadership, right? Is it all hands on deck for this Agile transition? Do you have upper management buy-in? Typically, if you have a good functioning Scrum team working in, let's say, development team, and you're like, wow, this really works. We should scale this, right? We should make this be the way we operate all over the organization. That's where large scale Agile comes into play. And you can try to influence upwards. But in my experience, what I've seen work the best is when it comes down. When you already have buy-in from the CEO and from the CIO and the VP and all these, when all of the top management is like, yes, we want to go Agile, every effort you're trying to come up with just goes easier. I've tried to influence upwards and I've struggled because I'm trying to explain this is what the benefit you're going to realize if you change this process to this. But because I don't have the clout of a C-level executive, sometimes people don't want to take on the ideas I'm putting out there, even though it makes sense because I don't have the leverage to give them the confidence to really make a change. So I've found that when the C-level executives already decide that this is where they want to go, and they give that strategic direction, I can take it and run with it, right? Because they've already given the sign off. This is where you're going. I can then go then execute on it. But influencing the other way up, it's always a pain. So, how to make your sprint planning more effective? How to make your sprint transition better? If you get buy-in from the top management to get this done. Are executives and leaders invested in the success of the transition to Agile, or are they being oversold on what Agile will deliver? So, the other challenge with this is sometimes when we're trying to influence upwards, you might have, you might explain this to your project manager and they go in and talk to the VP and like, you know what, we're going to suggest this to the CEO. And so they go in there and they start telling the CEO all kinds of wonderful things, right? We're going to do Agile. It's going to be faster. You're going to deliver to your customers better. Every 2 weeks, you're going to have new delivery out there. The customers can see changes. They're not going to have as much wait time and you can resolve things, all the great things that Agile is supposed to deliver. But they sell it so well that it's oversold. Because now the CEO walks away thinking that, boom, tomorrow it's going to be like 2 weeks and you start having things out there in production, right? They don't explain that it takes a little time for the team to come together, to understand how to do things, to deliver what they said they're going to deliver. Because you could have this sprint planning planned and then you have how many story points you want to get done and then you don't do half of that. And so everything gets pushed. So I have not seen anyone do a very good job of really explaining to C-suite executives the nuances that could happen as we start to form the team. They kind of gloss over that, right? Because they want to get the agreement and the sign off. But I think it would be great to just explain this is what we're going to get to. We're going to take a little time to form. We're going to take a little time to come up with the right process that works for us. And then we're going to be able to start delivering this kind of stuff. Normally, CEOs think it's going to happen tomorrow. Right? And then it becomes a pressure. And then you feel like you're not delivering because they had this high expectation that was not realistic in the first place. So even if that's going on, another thing to do with the leadership is, do you have the support you need to resolve the challenges? The other thing I've seen is that the executive or the upper management talks a good talk, right? They sell it to the CEO and it's like, it's going to be great. And they sell it to the team as well. We're going to change, we're going to do that. And then they leave it. They're done. Their job is just to give strategic direction. They don't have to get their hands dirty. But the problem is that it's a whole different thinking, right? So unless you have a coach to walk you through the best practice, you're going to end up making a lot of mistakes. It's going to be costly. That's going to make you feel frustrated. And you might feel like you have absolutely no guidance in how to get this thing started. So either get a coach, and if you don't have an agile coach, then the person who's championing this, they need to have some best practice in mind that they can suggest to you. They can't just say, okay, go form a team, go self-organize, and output this thing within 2 weeks. That's not how it works, right? I've just seen a lot of hands-off approach, and the team eventually self-organizes, eventually figures it out, but it's so painful that if you have the vision to transform the company into something else, you should also have some high-level transitioning steps that they can follow that actually makes sense. And so if you have a leader who is doing that, then you're in such a great place and your transition will be much more successful. And you'll make your sprint planning definitely more effective because you have that leadership, that kind of guidance, not minute, not meddling, not in so much in the weeds that you can't move, but just like big best practices that you can follow. You know what I mean? That helps you to know exactly some of the parameters that you can follow as opposed to it being the wild, wild west. It's just too much. All right. So the other thing is, let's talk about your Scrum events. Now, do you have agreement on the Scrum events? Right? Is everyone agreeing to the timelines for these events? So, we're going to talk about Scrum events more in a minute, but you need to make sure you account for the dynamic of your team. It could be personal things, like maybe you have somebody on the team that is a single mom and has 3 kids, and they got to drop their kids at school in the morning, and by the time they come back, then they have to give their daily Scrum update, and it's like, you just got to your computer. How can you start talking about what your roadblocks are? Give them some breathing room to get in, look at what messages they have in Jira, check on things so that they can actually have something viable or useful to tell you. I always hate when they have a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. Like, I just got to my desk. What do you want to know? Leave me alone. Right? I never have my Scrum as first thing in the morning because people are coming in, they're rushing, they're trying to get to their desk. They just got started in the day. The first thing they should have is not you in their face asking them, do you have any roadblocks? The day just started. Give the people a break. So it's just one of those things, right? Or sometimes I've seen teams do their daily Scrum at the end of the day. So they had the whole day to work through things. At the end of the day, they give the daily Scrum and say, okay, this was a roadblock today. Let's see if we could probably work on fixing it tomorrow. What I don't like about that is that it feels late, because if I hear a roadblock at 5 in the afternoon, or let's say 4:30, because 5 you're out of the door, but let's say at 4:30, there's not much time for me to solve it. And I'm the kind of person, once I hear something, I want to go fix it right away. So then I'm going to have to sleep on it. The next day, wake up, I kind of lose some of the momentum. So I don't really like end of day daily scrums. I prefer in the morning, to be honest, but it doesn't have to be the first thing in the morning. So if you start your job normally at 9, then have your Scrum 9:30. Give people half an hour to just get into the system and, absorb, breathe, drink some coffee, and then you can have a daily Scrum that makes sense. Or 10 o'clock. But not, I don't like it too late. I don't want it in the middle of the day because you're working and you don't want to disrupt that. And I don't like it too late at night. But that's just me. But think about those things, right? Talk to your team about what makes sense for them based on the environment. If you have onshore, offshore teams, the time differences that you have to account for, the dynamic of the team, pay attention to, single moms or even married couples, but let's say one person is traveling, the other person has to stay home with the kids. They got to run and drop the kids at school and come back and rush the traffic, all that stuff. Give people a break. Make your team, the team is high. It's going to become high performing if you do the things I'm telling you to do. So you gotta be agile to your team as well. All right. All right, let's talk about setting up your Scrum events. This will make or break your Scrum process. Yes, so how to make your sprint planning more effective and how to make your transition into Agile Scrum more effective is going to be on you picking and doing the Scrum events. Okay, it will make or break. So let's talk a little bit about those events. So the first event, obviously, is the sprint. The sprint itself is an event, right? It happens with the time block that you chose. Normally it's 2 weeks, and it starts and ends on the days that you say it starts and ends. We talked about that earlier. Then you have your sprint planning event. Then you have your daily scrum, which is normally a 15-minute meeting that you have every day to make sure you can clear roadblocks and that you can call out anything that the entire team needs to know about. Then you have your sprint review. At the end of the sprint, you do a sprint review, go back over the sprint and figure out, how the sprint was, what did you accomplish. You can have some demos in there and things like that. And then you have your sprint retrospective. So those are the 5 Scrum events. And most people stick to that. That's what's in the Scrum guide, and people stick to that, and that's great. But I will tell you something. Over here where it says supporting events, if you don't have those supporting events, you're not going to have the most effective sprint planning. You're not going to have the most effective sprint. You're not going to have a very good transition into Agile Scrum. Okay, so everybody's talking about these things. This is what's in the books, in your courses, your certifications, what everybody stresses on. This is what is the most important things. But by the way, you shouldn't be skipping any of these things. I know people who say, well, the retrospective, we don't need to do it every sprint. Let's do it every other sprint. What? No, you always need to reflect so you can improve. Don't skip the retrospective. It's very important, and get everybody's participation in it. right? So definitely, and some people want to do their daily scrum every 2 days, depends. I think it's great to have it every day. Even with a small team, you never know. You don't want to wait 2 days for some problem you have to be fixed. That may take another 2 days. Now you've wasted a whole week, right? So every day, do your daily scrum. So these are your events. And daily scrum is almost synonymous with the stand up, the daily stand up. We call it stand up, but it's in the scrum guide, they call it daily scrum, but it's the same thing. So here are the events that nobody talks about. Nobody's talking about this. I'm going to give you a secret to having, more effective sprint planning. And the secret to being able to transition to agile well, you need these things in blue. This is the secret. So you need to be able to have your backlog refinement. So for me, in my environment and what I've been doing, which I've seen work in multiple places that people don't talk about, is the backlog refinement is to prioritize the backlog. So you have your backlog of items, your product backlog items, and the product owner has the sole responsibility to prioritize. This is the person responsible for what we work on. So normally having a meeting with the product owner, yourself and the product owner, maybe somebody else, depends on your environment, to just go through and say, this is the next prioritized item based on the roadmap, based on what they have coming down the pipeline, right? They know what the business is asking for, what the customers are needing. They have their roadmap probably in a different tool, maybe Air Focus, maybe Product Board, whatever, AHA, whatever product management tool they're using. They have this roadmap out there, and now they want to make sure the Jira tickets, if you're using Jira, or the product backlog item, is prioritized according to what they need to get done in the highest priority being first. So this could be just a half an hour meeting. It doesn't have to mean that you're going to elaborate details. Some items in there you might need discussion. Some you might just table it. Once you read the user story, you can clarify. You can kind of know what it is, and then you decide how important it is. Again, the person who decides is the product owner typically, but you provide background information for them to make that decision. So it doesn't need to be diving deep into every single one of these product backlog items and making sure you understand everything before you can prioritize. Sometimes you can just prioritize based on what it says, right? So they give you a basic prioritization, but then what I like to do is have a separate discussion where we look at the priority and we determine what are the dependencies. This is a more technical conversation because sometimes you might be building something, but you need a new architecture. So you need to get the architect in there to build out this architecture, figure out how it's going to work, especially where you have heavy back-end things and lots of API calls. So all of that stuff needs to happen in the technical dependency, or it could just be a front end thing where you're trying to build this model, but it's being used on this screen. And if you build it over here, you're going to modify the screen. It's going to affect over there. So now they got to decouple it from that screen and make it available only on this screen and different on another screen. You never know. These things come out. But this is the dependency that you're focused on, not necessarily the priority or even the feature, but how is it dependent in the back end? What's the technical constraints or what's tied to what's going to unravel what, right? This is where the tech leads is important. So it doesn't need to be everybody in the team, just the tech leads and yourself and the product owner. And then I like to have the sprint grooming as well. Sprint grooming is everything that we've prioritized for this upcoming sprint. Here is a session that the whole team comes together and discuss that story. Sometimes we point to the sprint grooming, sometimes we don't, but they want to discuss it to tease out um, errors, maybe missing requirements, maybe things that need to go in the technical discussion. So the difference between the technical discussion, in my experience, and the sprint grooming is that the technical discussion doesn't have everybody in it. It's just a select few. And the point of this meeting is to clean it up a little bit, have enough information from these tech leads to make sure that it makes sense. And when you bring it to the sprint grooming now, they can feel confident about the solutions they're coming up with. They may suggest that we do it a different way. We might have to go back to UX to go clean up the UI design to match the new suggestion. All that stuff is happening in your sprint grooming, which normally happens a week before your sprint planning. So if you want to have an effective sprint planning, you got to do these things, especially the sprint grooming. Why is this important? It's the very same tickets that you see in the sprint grooming often are the same tickets that will be pointed in sprint planning. But what it does is it lets them see the tickets ahead of time. Yes, we know that it's in Jira, for example. They can always go in there and look at it. But each sprint, the team is focused on burning down the items in that sprint. They don't always have the time to go look at go look at the backlog and see what's coming up next. That's not really their focus or even their job. They're working on what's in front of them right now. So when you have the sprint grooming, you're putting in front of them a new set of tickets where they can then look at it, digest it, think about it. Sometimes the solution they come up with on the spot may not be the most optimal, but because they've had a week or so to think about it, maybe the next day they've thought about it, they're like, you know what? I think the better way to do this would be to do XYZ. And so when they come to sprint planning, they would have had enough time to see it. So it's they're seeing it for the second time in sprint planning. Now they come back with having thought about it a little bit more, having more ideas, and we can refine it in the sprint planning because they had chance to think about it. If they saw it for the first time in the sprint planning, they may not come up with the most optimal solution, although while they're working on it, they may come up with something and you can change it during the sprint. But you really do help yourself to have a more effective sprint planning if you have the sprint grooming. And you have a better sprint grooming if you have the technical discussion before with the team leads. And you have a better technical discussion if you had the backlog refinement. So you know exactly what the priority is. See how that works? I'm telling you, these things is the secret. This is the secret sauce, guys. Now, if you're working in an environment where it's just your, stories are coming in and you're quickly solving them and releasing the same day, it goes out the same day, it's just like quick updates and patches and quick fixes and hot fixes. Maybe you don't need these because what you're doing is so quick and so fast, you don't need to have all this talk. So maybe it doesn't apply to you. But if you're in an environment where you are building like features that are very intricate, that have lots of moving parts, and there's dependencies, and there's multiple API calls, and it might be a new feature that we don't yet have, and you're coming up with something for the first time, and there's a lot of UX components, and it's just a bigger feature, then you need this. You need this. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to make your sprint planning as effective as it could be, and your Scrum process may not be as effective as well. So there you have it. Now, what's the benefit of doing what I just explained to you? Well, if you do this, you're going to make your sprint planning more effective for sure. You're going to make your transition to Agile Scrum much smoother for sure. You're going to reduce building it wrong, right? So remember, as a business analyst, you're there to tell them what to build, and they determine how to build it. And they're going to try to build it right. Build it right the first time. But if you don't have these discussions in blue, these ones in blue over here, then you ended up probably building it wrong and having to do rework, and also having maybe exposing things to the customer that you shouldn't be exposing, risking the reputation of your software, your company, and also building a lot of tech debt, right? Having tech debt to go fix it later on because there were multiple eyes on it because you had the sprint grooming. So you had the backlog, which was just right, glossing over it and prioritizing it. Then you had a technical discussion, which was more in depth with just a few people. Then you had the whole team looking at it in sprint grooming. And then the whole team looked at it again in sprint planning, right? So this is happening a week before sprint planning. This happens at sprint. This is the sprint planning. They would have seen it at least twice. Some people would have seen it 3-4 times. But the development team at least would have seen it twice. And so you reduce the likelihood of building it wrong because you've seen it so many times and you've had time to think about it, right? And then you reduce missing requirements because of all the discussion. Things are going to come out more. So because you had more discussion, you are likely to tease out any missing requirements better, right? This is a way of how to make your sprint planning more effective. Also, you'll uncover dependencies earlier. So the product owner had the chance to either move the story out because there's so much tech debt required to make this work, or something, but they have a chance to plan better, to put things in the sprint that's actually ready to go, right? Or work towards things that's going to help future enhancements be better. That's how you make your sprint planning more effective, right? So you uncover dependencies earlier and can call them out to aid in the planning. So that's what I had for you today, right? Help your team, one goal. And this is the face I'll be giving you if you start doing the things I'm suggesting in this video, right? You get the smiley face, not the grumpy face, right? Think about how this can work in your company. right? And of course, if you need more advice from me, you can book a consultation with me. I'll put the link in the description below. You can also go to my website, karaleise.com. And I have so many things on there. I have templates on there. I have free courses on there. I have a fit test to make sure that you're a fit for the business analysis career. So many good things out there, all of it free. And you can also book me, as I said, if you want to really have a one-on-one conversation to help you transition into Agile Scrum or just to answer any questions that you may have. All right. So, guys, that's it for today. I will see y'all next time. Take care. Bye bye.